Look at this. How to restructure serving the city, going to have 1 million people in 2 years.
Mr. Winston?
Well, in that vein, this is not simply about getting emails answered. This is not simply about making sure that the phones are answered. This is not the situation of a subpar response from the existing staff that we have. While each council member has different needs, my needs are not being met, right? I don't have the ability to be at every committee meeting, initiatives and decisions. I don't have, we don't have that person that can sit in meetings with us and make sure. It would be more like a chief of staff, a policy analyst, people that can help advise me on how to do this job. And currently to ourselves, how to use that to, again, restructure this so that we are really able to do this job as city councilmen, as boards of directors of this $2.6 billion corporation in an effective manner. Because as it is right now, it is insufficient.
Dr. Harlow.
On the record to reflect, he owes me $1 for giving him that policy analyst. And we spent 5 hours in a car on the way to Raleigh talking about this, back and forth. But so, you know, my original inclination was not to support anything that remotely resembled something like this. I thought, and I now have been since corrected yesterday, and you just heard it reiterated. I thought this was this was a human resource conversation. That was something is insufficient with the duties of the people doing their job. And me personally, I was fine with everything Amanda has done for me, and does a lot. And so I was concerned a little bit with the concept of, you know, adding staff doesn't make us more efficient. So what would these extra staff members be doing? And, you know, the conversations came up around, you know, will we just have coffee boys, and will we have people doing dry cleaning and filling our gas tanks and getting car washed? And so that when I saw this, I was like, this is absurd. Future conversations have happened, and this is how I just thought council support, supporting extra stuff. Because I'm like, you know, if your emails are being handled and you're checking your emails and you're helping manage your calendar with, you know, some support staff, what more was there? And then the conversations got around having other representatives for us. There's a meeting going on tonight. Ms. Mayfield and I were asked to send representatives. We don't have other representatives. When I say, hey, we're going to spend 10 hours, we're in a meeting all night, so we can't come. And so this is where the policy analysts, you know, chief of staff, right-hand man type of conversations came from. And so I'm more inclined to say I actually totally agree with that. The way that we operate, and as someone with a job, but also as someone who hires people and has to think about, okay, am I hiring someone to be more efficient, or am I hiring someone because I just want to push off more work? I understand the sides of that, and I believe that, yeah, we're a city of 1 million people essentially, 60 whatever people moving here a day. The demands that are pressed upon us, we can't be everywhere at one time, but there's an opportunity to possibly have staff that can represent us in those manners when need be, because the demands are only going to grow. And so I was planning to come in here today if I didn't ride up to Raleigh with him and try to tear this one up. But yeah, look at God, right? So I'm in support of that, and it does speak to a larger conversation around, you know, how we really operate, and that's not a budget conversation for today, but something to think about in moving forward. So I think these are dollars well spent. There's some kinks to work out to make sure people aren't being abused in their roles, for sure. But I think this would be dollars well spent, because we're operating essentially no differently than we always have, with knowing that there are increased demands and fewer staff.
Councilmember Ajmira.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it's interesting because I had asked during one-on-one meeting, I think it was a year ago, where I said, have you ever thought about having one-on-one staff? And I know that was something like, well, no, I don't think we'll ever get to that. And I'm glad we are having this discussion because I don't think I'm the only one who feels that we need additional support. But my question is, how can we do more in a more cost-effective manner. So currently, what you have is 733,000. I was looking at it. Is it possible that we could hire a junior staff to be more cost-effective? Because the current budget is, I think, about 500,000, and the rest is going towards capital, which is the capital improvement. Have you looked at other options?
So we haven't, so the way we priced this to start off, it's basically a $65,000 positions, and that's based on something that you have now. So depending on whether we're talking about junior analysts or policy analysts, that may fluctuate in terms of how do you attract the talent that you want.
Okay. Do you have any other questions, Ms. Mayfield? No. Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, as crazy as it is, 4 terms in behind Councilmember Mitchell, number 2 as far as senior staff around here, and we've been having the same conversation as long as I've been in office. I think, Mr. Manager, there's some flexibility where it might not necessarily be the 7. I am in support of us moving forward because it is needed, but also recognizing that council members have different needs. So I've had an intern now 4 years. My intern has gone off and gotten a real job because we couldn't, because I was paying him because the city doesn't have a way to do that. But when you think about what has been shared, our community meetings, there are multiple days during the week where every second Tuesday of the month, I have 5 neighborhood meetings. And they all start between 5:30 and 7. At least 3 times a month, that is what my calendar looks like, where there's 3 or more meetings, not including the rezonings that are going on. And I try to attend the majority of my rezoning meetings that are happening, and then all the other requests that go on. So it is difficult to try to stay on top of not just what goes on here in the office. I think there's a piece where there's work that we do outside of the office in community where it would be helpful if we had more flexibility, because our current staff aren't able to do that. That would be ridiculous to expect them to come in and work 8 to 5 and then go on to work the schedule that we work. Because at the end of the day, we made a conscious decision and jumped up and down and said we wanted to do this. But it would be really beneficial to have some help with doing this. But for us to decide what that helps looks like, everybody's not going to need an additional person. So let it be if we have to you have to create a form where we break down what we need in order to keep it equitable, because there's a different conversation when you're looking at inclusion and what's equitable. What's equitable for me isn't necessarily the calendar that my colleagues have. But I don't want to deter. If the current model works for them, great. It's not working for the schedule and the calendar that I have. I need more. And that's pushing me in a position where I'm getting community people to do this work to help be in all these places where they're not being compensated for it. But also, there's that transparency piece. How much information can we have a volunteer have access to versus a staff member? And then when they come to staff, how accessible are they? How much information do they have access to if they're trying to work with 311 to follow up on a call, to actually learn the training of how to maneuver the different departments? So I'm in support of this, but I want to make sure that we give the flexibility for your office to identify our individual needs and act accordingly. But when we keep talking about those traits, and we look at our sister cities throughout National League of Cities, we are far behind in constituency services. And if it's a conversation where we need to rethink what is the role of staff versus the role of council, then we got to find some time later to have that real conversation, because if the expectation is for us to do this part-time, constituency services are going to considerably be hindered, and you're going to see a decline in it, because as we continue to grow, I'm looking at my area alone, just District 3, there's 7 years later, there's still neighborhoods or side streets that I'm finding now. Our city is growing, and we need help. Now, everybody might not feel that way, so do the research to figure out who needs it the most, but make sure that it's an equitable conversation, and let's compensate people accordingly.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So I support what my colleagues are saying, and we all are sort of saying it in different ways. One of the reasons I was supportive of having some sort of a committee that looks at this is because I think we have to have everybody's perspective on how they use services of the city, how they should be used, how they shouldn't be used. I do think when we were talking about the pay level for city council members, and apparently we didn't, I guess we voted not to continue that discussion.
We got the response in here.
In the book, we're comparing this, I had done this research about 6 months ago, and I compared it to the cities that we always talk about when we talk about economic development. You know, who are we losing employers to? And that's not on the list here. It's not Fayetteville, it's not High Point, it's not El Paso, it's Austin, it's Nashville, it's Seattle. And those cities, we were the second lowest pay of any of those cities, with the exception, I think, of Boston. But Boston has each Boston council member has a full-time assistant. So somehow, whether it's with pay, and we decide, because some council members have used interns that they also use for campaign purposes, which I think is, you know, that has to be discussed. But you either have to have the funds in your own salary to be able to pay for your interns to use them the way you want, or it has to come from the city. So somehow, I would like to see this, a platform that we can have this more broad discussion.
All right, Mr. Eggleston?
Couple of things, and I'll be brief-ish. I think we all need to be clear if this happens, and I'm somewhat supportive of it. If it does happen, these are city employees. These are not our employees.
Right.
And if I see one of these city employees ever carrying somebody's dry cleaning, they should expect to be publicly shamed for it. Because I can see it going that direction, and that would be completely unacceptable.
Unethical.
Same goes for having them helping you organize a campaign event. I think that would be completely unacceptable, and people should expect to be called out for it. To some of the point that Mayor Pro Tem just made, $581,699 divided by 11 is about $53,000. So I mean, part of this for some people, and maybe not others, is all right, theme music. Is a personal capacity issue. So for me, I don't necessarily have a preference. I mean, there's a certain amount of work that has to get done as the representative for District 1, and if you know, Mr. Winston had brought it up, it didn't get much traction, but if it is a full-time salary, then that becomes all you have to concern yourself with work-wise, that adds capacity to your personal time capacity. If it means that we have a dedicated staff person, that adds capacity. So I don't know that it matters to me which direction it goes, but I think there is a capacity issue where the work is outpacing the time capacity that we each individually have. So I think this could address that. I think the salary thing could address that. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be both immediately, but I think it should be one or the other. But I would want to make sure we have some very clear boundaries defined as to what is appropriate work for a city employee who happens to be specifically focused on your office. That is not your campaign person. That is not your to-do list person.
Mr. Bakari?
Thank you, Mayor.
I do have you.
I think that it's 2018 and we're operating in a support and staff model from the 1990s. I mean, that's probably the best way I can say it. And at some level, though, I would disagree with my colleague over there. You know, I love you, but I put some of this at your doorstep. Yeah, I mean, this is some of the city manager's responsibility to be looking, and I know you haven't been there since the 1990s, but there's a piece of it why this conversation's come to a head like this in this forum is that it hadn't been solved, and throwing money and staff at it in this kind of forum is now, I think, kind of a level of frustration or last resort. So I will tell you that hearing Councilman Winston's description of kind of this new hybrid kind of community outreach and gathering, it actually makes a lot of sense. I personally, as a district rep, have a lot of different things that I'm challenged with. And I'll tell you, email volume, calendar, phone calls, all that stuff. I mean, I'm barely treading water in it, and you can't work more hours in a week than I am right now. You just can't. So I need to get smarter there. I need staff help. I think there's a model. We need more help, but I think there's got to be some model where you can look in existing staff, look around to over 8,000 employee organization and say, well, we could have this person do kind of this. I think people would jump at the chance to be able to kind of be a center of excellence for policy help and policy wonks and analysts, a center of excellence for email across the board. And I'd say I'm all in for that type of model, but I need you to solve that for us, because that amount of money is almost the amount of money to close the gap for step 13 officers. And I mean, that's just, it's unacceptable to think about spending that amount of money on our support when we need to creatively figure that out if we're not going to solve something extraordinary for the officers at that stepped up level. So that would be my only comment. I don't mean to be harsh, because again, you haven't been around long enough to really own the full burden of this. But we've talked to BK, I personally have, every single month for 6 months now. And he's heard me, and he's trying to be creative, but maybe this is the political kind of will and capital you need now to go own this and just solve it. So I'm going to vote against it, but it doesn't mean I'm not drowning, and it doesn't mean I don't agree with all the points that were there. I hope you can solve it without spending the amount of money that would take our officers at step 13 to the level.
Mr. Driggs?
Thank you. People have touched on some of the things I was going to say. I was going to point out that if we hired 4 new people, you could give $30,000 raises to each member of this council. And if we had a secret ballot on that, I wonder how the vote would turn out, frankly. But it gets back to a more basic question, which is the way this is supposed to work is we communicate our priorities and so on to the manager, and the manager makes staffing decisions. And he decides how to carry that out and how to deliver the things that we asked for. When we start getting involved in personnel decisions, which is why I had a problem with an earlier vote too, we're kind of crossing over. So what we should do is we should communicate clearly to the manager, we have a problem with support services. And you tell us in your budget and otherwise how you propose to go about addressing that. And I think you've heard some thoughts here about where the shortages are or what kind of talent we might need. I don't think it boils down to let's just hire 7 more people like the ones we have and do more of what we were doing. So I think the solution could be for us to vote some amount of money toward improvement or enhancement of support services, not tied to any specific hiring requirements or anything else, but just sort of back up our requests for better support with funding, and have you then think about how, because that was the point of my question earlier too. It's like, you tell us, I don't want to be telling you what people we need and where they have to sit. I want to tell you what services, we each need to tell you what services we need, and you need to figure out how to provide them. So if possible, I would offer as an alternative to this and I'm not sure I get there. I mean, I'm also sensitive to the point Mr. Bakari made about this is a big amount. That did concern me, but I guess as a compromise, I would offer a $500,000 increase in funding for council operations and support services, not including the new hire, which is also additional funding in that area, and kind of wait for you to come back and tell us, after maybe talking to each member, what you think the most productive way is to do that.
All right, was that a motion, Mr. Driggs?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second? Well, discussion and questions, go ahead. I mean, I think this is a dialogue. Go for it, Mr. Mitchell.
$500,000. Why not 733, or give him the flexibility to come out after he does some analysis? How'd you get 500,000?
Well, it's sort of like the earmark we did before for your proposal. The idea is we acknowledge...
500,000?
No, it was less, but the principle is the same, which is we've identified a need. We want to put some money against that, but we don't want to prejudge what is basically the manager's... And for that matter, if you can tell us in this meeting what you think the investment needs to be and make a suggestion as part of your proposed budget, I think it would be more constructive, rather than you coming back and saying, okay, 7 more people, 733,000, to say, this is how I propose to address the concern that has been raised, and this is the amount of money I need for that.
Just,
Go ahead.
you know, just as a follow-up to be creative, and I think, Mayor, I think you were here, I think everybody else. So the late Susan Burgess, part of what we did for her was create a public administrator at UNC Charlotte. I had to get it right, Tracy. UNC Charlotte. And so some of us have tried to use interns from that program to work as intern in our office. And so my comment, City Manager, just get creative for other ways we can plug in our education institutions, because for the first 6 years when I was District 2 rep, I used public administration majors from Johnson C. Smith. So I do think there's some capital out there in the community we can take advantage of that would not cost us the current salary. But I guess I'm just kind of curious how we get to five. I would not be supporting the motion of $500,000. I would just like to give him the ability to hear some of our needs and come back with a analysis.
So what's your number?
I say keep it as a placeholder right there, and let the city manager, after he talked to us, come back to us.
That
I don't
number
want
is
him to
based
think,
on one assumption, which you yourself are saying is not necessarily the right answer, at which point we're back to
But I
the
don't
same
wanna
place.
short-
I'd make a substitute motion that we do everything that Mr. Driggs said, but we hand it to the manager to bring back in the next
That's
Monday
better.
meeting with no number recommendation, knowing that he's heard us that some people are not getting served properly in what they need going forward, and others have concerns that any amount of money with the things we're talking about there. So just, you know,
That's a motion, a substitute motion.
yes.
Is there a second to it?
We don't give him.
I have a second,
That's it.
a substitute motion. You
Second
know,
that.
guys, this is what I've heard everybody, and I know we're coming back
Sorry.
around.
Yeah.
We're coming back around because I have Mr. Winston and Ms. Ashmira, but I think what you're talking about is a workflow study, and it needs to be done. It needs to be done well to figure out what works. And as much as we all like to think we're going to be here as long as Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Mayfield, some of us are not. So there has to be a core responsibility for people to do. And then there are, of course, things that people want done differently just because of who they are. And that has to be taken into account with some flexibility. In addition to that, I do think, in terms of automation, this council, if nothing else, has talked about how to do things better. And I think that we really have been trying, but it's always been about, you know, what can be done better for me instead of the collective. And where is that core of collective for technology as well as people, and how? So I do think that that is a good solution, to have the manager come back. I don't know if there's a time frame that you guys, did you say a time?
2 business days.
2 business days.
See you on Monday.
You know, actually, I think we have one meeting in July and one meeting in August. I think it would be fair to do it right, to have the right kind of consultant come in, or person, maybe the UNC Charlotte folks, you know, think about the Harvard Business School and what they've just done in Puerto Rico in terms of, you know, counts and.
So I would
that, so
specify in that motion then that,
I've got
because
some.
I don't want to lose what Councilman Winston is clearly going to say with his hand raised next, which is, now's the time, now's the budget, we missed this window, we're done.
No, that's
So,
not what I'm saying.
well, that's not what he's going to say at all. I just say,
Yeah, I thought you, yeah.
I don't,
we're not on the same
yes.
page.
Can I?
So, timing, just come back with
Wait,
something on Monday.
I know, I'm trying to hear him, but I couldn't hear him because.
Sorry.
What
Yeah,
were you saying?
Your question was timeline. I too think that this might need longer study, but perhaps they can figure out enough to know on Monday's meeting, where we're going to reconvene on the budget, if there is something you need to earmark here, an amount, versus we just need the study, I can't figure it out in that time. You know, that way you have
I
ultimate
certainly-
flexibility.
I certainly wasn't suggesting that he just study, because you were expecting a plan and a solution.
By Monday.
By Monday, right. So all I was suggesting is you have a zoning meeting in July. Would give them some time to actually talk to everybody individually. I mean, I've heard lots of ideas, but I've also heard lots of other ideas from individuals without, just in this short time. But it's up to you guys. I'm sure the manager's listening carefully. So I have Mr. All right, everybody has spoken. Mr. Newton, do you want to weigh in? Because otherwise I'll just start again. Mr. Phipps has not spoken, so then after we do that, I'll go to Mr. Winston.
Yeah, and listening to my colleagues, I do think that what we are proposing here with this structure, I think it has to be looked at in the context of how we reconfigure our overall structure as a council. I mean, to me, having a dedicated staff person, you know, when you still got a 2-year term and making a stipend, you know, it really, it's disjointed to me. I think it needs to be collectively considered under an umbrella on how we want to possibly reconfigure how we are structured as a council. That this would only be a piece of it. And at some point, you're gonna have to come back and address the other piece. So really, and I get heartburn on the 700-some thousand when we just looked at 553,000 for the additional funds and what we're going to do with law enforcement. So you know, I just think that we need to do a deliberative approach instead of this piecemeal approach that we're contemplating now. That's what I think.
Okay. Mr. Newton, did you want to say anything before we go around?
Oh, no, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Mr. Winston and Ms. Ajmira.
So, there are some things I agree with, some things I would disagree with my colleagues. No, I would disagree with the mayor's suggestion of putting this off to a workflow study. I think this, in what Mr. Phipps was saying, several other council members were saying, that this does speak to there is a larger issue here that we should study, like I suggested several times, most specifically in the last business meeting that we had, that we convened a subcommittee, that we look at the structure of how we do what we do here on council, not just staff-wise. And some of my colleagues decided to go against that, to give the mayor another week. I have not heard any movement on how to structure that subcommittee to get that work done. So that would be the long-term work that I would suggest that we do, and I will continue to press us to do. But this step is more for the immediate. This is to make the next 18 months of this term, and hopefully that can continue for future councils as effective as possible to operate the type of city that we are and are growing into. So I would not be for prolonging this to a workflow study. This is something that can happen right now, and I do agree with giving the manager more of the flexibility to tailor make these types of hires and these types of changes to the specific needs of the council members. I think that's what I reiterated at the beginning of this decision, and it doesn't have to be tied in to that $733,617 amount. I would question how, with the $500,000 amount, where that would come from. I would much rather give the manager discretion of how to sufficiently make this happen. But we know that, as we see either way, it's going to be a significant dollar amount. So I wouldn't want to see it be done on, in a minimalistic way. This is to make our government work in a better way. But there's other policy decisions, and not a workflow study, that we as a council need to take up. I hope we do it really soon.
Okay, Mr. Driggs?
Yes, I just wanted to say my 500,000 was intended to recognize that we need to put some resources against this now, right? So if we embark on a study process and so on, or whatever, and then we start thinking about, okay, how do we pay for that? So I'd like to just have a number, and you and I can go out and buy. Well, again, I think this number is arbitrary because it's associated with a solution that we agree is probably not the one we're going to adopt. And that's why I was suggesting that if you could do a high level, take a high level look at this and suggest to us what the means are that you need in order to act on what you've been hearing today. We don't want to send you away and say, okay, we need some help on our services, but we're not going to give you any money. So I don't know how we solve that, but I'm just saying I think it's more urgent than to just agree on some study that gets done several months from now and gets implemented later than that.
So, Mr. Jones?
So Mayor, members of council, so this is in one of those moments where whatever I say next could be one of those things that maybe I shouldn't have said, so
You're
I
in
don't
trouble
know.
anyway. Forget
Exactly.
it.
We'll give you,
Don't do
we'll
it,
give you a
don't do
free
it.
pass.
Okay, so, somebody's trying to figure out exactly. So I believe I'd like to have an opportunity to assess, not 8 months, 9 months, 3 weeks, just assess what your needs are. And we have a reduction in force in this budget. And there are 3 people related to communications. And I'm not just saying that, 3 people, all of a sudden, I'm going to give you those 3, but it's 8,000 slots, okay, in this organization, all right? Give me a chance to figure out what you need, and let's do it the right way. Let's have confidential surveys, let's really talk, okay? And somewhere in here, I believe that at least 3 resources, I can find a way to maneuver in this budget. And I would ask that you don't give me any money to do this. It makes things a lot easier.
So moved?
Second, third.
If you give me the flexibility to address it, and I would hope that everybody understands everything that each other said
What
to
he
each
said.
That was
other.
a substitute motion that's on the floor to ask the manager to do this and without any allocation of funding. Is that, and it had a second, I don't remember who seconded it, but
I
we'll count.
seconded
it. I did second.
That's right, Mr. Mitchell seconded. That's the motion on the floor. Any
Discussion.
further discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Winston?
Yes. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Jones, and I know it got very sexy when he said no money,
Right.
and so everybody jumped on it.
Right.
But what I'm hearing is that we're going to maybe look at putting another Band-Aid on an issue, possibly 3 weeks from now, that this is not going to be part of the budget. This is going to be, I don't know, it feels like that because it got sexy, we're willing to put a little glue, spit and dirt on it and not deal with the issue. I don't know. I'm not necessarily in favor of what was just suggested.
Okay, I have Mr. Phipps, Mr. Eggleston, and Ms. Edgemira.
I think that I would need to know then, I mean, if we're talking about this budget cycle, what it would mean then, what it would mean for our tax rate to have this in it, you know? I mean, I would have to have some more information to inform me of what the true cost would be and what it would mean.
I think we have a motion now, though,
Right.
without the cost. So we have a motion.
Yeah.
Mr. Eggleston and then Ms. Edgemira, and then I'm going to just ask if there's 6 votes to support the proposal that the manager come back within 3 weeks with an assessment and a recommendation. All right, so Mr. Eggleston and Ms. Edgemira.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say, I think we kind of laughed when he said, don't give me any money. But I didn't hear you say, this will definitely not cost anything.
Right.
I think I heard you just say, I don't necessarily need you to allocate me something to explore what I think might be a solution. That solution might cost money. That solution might be moving people from one floor to another floor.
Exactly.
So I don't think that the manager's proposal or my interpretation of it was, I can do this for free.
Right.
It was just, you weren't asking for a specific takeaway dollar amount to play with right now. So,
Ms. Edgemira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So also to further clarify, if we were to put this in budget, it would go in effect next year. However, what you are proposing, Mr. Manager, would go in effect in, let's say, in a month. Am I understanding this correctly?
Right, so
Okay.
in this budget, there is a reduction in force. And my goal was to make sure no one lost a job. So somewhere in here, people are going to move around in this organization, and there could be some skill sets that are related to some of the things I heard today that would mean that we would open up a slot somewhere or move an FTE from one department over to the Office of Constituent Services. And so that's what I mean by it. But I will say it's not, you won't end up at the end of this with what you have now, because that would be disingenuous.
All right, so we have the motion is to ask the manager to take the next 3 weeks to come back with an assessment and a recommendation for the staffing issues that the council has noted today. And it includes recommendations. It does not decide that. The council will have to decide that as a separate vote, I think, how you do it. So with that, that's the motion. Is there anything that you would add to that, or did I miss anything?
I mean, based on the fact that it's now been put 3 weeks out, which is after we vote on the budget, and you don't need the budget, all that makes total sense. I'm wondering, like, does it need to come back for a vote? And I think, like, or do you just do it, and then we bring up a motion if myself or Councilman Winston or someone is not satisfied with what you've done? So maybe I'd augment that to say, do the study, come up with the stuff, meet all of our needs, solve the problem in 3 weeks, so in 4 weeks you implement, and we'll bring it back up should that not meet our needs. Is that fair?
Yeah.
That's the new motion, the friendly augmentation.
That's his interpretation of what we just motioned.
I don't know, I'm too tired right now.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
I just want to say, I don't know how we do this, though, whatever the recommendation is, without some kind of number in the budget. I just don't see how that works.
There's a staff,
There's a staffing issue. I think Mr. Jones has said he's got 3 people that are about to be,
well, more than,
Well, but that's
not reassigned, but they have funding to be paid until they are. I don't know. I think he said 8,000 slots.
Yeah, but that's still a number that was going to be reduced, and therefore, it's just a shell game. I mean, it just seems to me that we have to have a placeholder that, whatever the amount is, I don't know how you figure that out, but that says, once the plan is done, because the plan's not going to be done by June 4th or June 11th, when we hopefully approve the budget. So and I think that's what Mr. Driggs was trying to say, is some number just has to be in there as a placeholder should this conversation go a lot longer.
If it's important to have a number, you could take what would have been the salary for this, which is not what you've asked for, which is 65,000, multiply it by 3, include a uptick of 3 FTE in the budget, and that's a placeholder. But I'm telling you, I don't need it.
you got it though.
Yes.
I don't know. I have a motion on the floor. I'm not quite sure that I can state it because it kind of
changed a
meandered
lot,
for a while.
Yeah, because you might not get a second. You keep
Yeah,
changing this.
it's changed a good bit. So let me try it again.
Yeah.
The manager would do an assessment, come back with a recommendation, would report back to you in 3 weeks, and that he would make that recommendation would include the ideas of permanent funding and how he would do it in the next 3 weeks. That's the original motion. It didn't include the money.
I'll stick with that.
Okay.
All right, so we have a motion, so let's go with that. All in favor, say, yes, we had a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Is that unanimous? All right, we're unanimous on that. Okay, so let's go now to a summary, and we are now at that point that we've considered all of the 21 items, and I'm not going to say,
Wait,
we have two more, 5 and 6.
wait, we did all the one-time adjustments too?
I'm sorry, what? Oh, that's right, we have the capital program. I was just trying to finish off. I thought we had finished. Does anyone want to revisit 5 and 6 under the operating ongoing, more incentive contributions for the health savings plans, or healthcare sliding scale for premium? Does anyone want to revisit 5 and 6? Yes, Mr. Driggs?
I wanted to talk about 6.
All right. Sliding health scale, sliding healthcare scale.
I will do.
All right, and you're going to introduce that, Mr.
Oh, I'm
Driggs?
sorry, 5 was the one I wanted to talk about, not 6.
Okay, so do you want to start with 5, Mr. Driggs?
I just wanted to say on this, I've been pretty involved in pushing for something like this because it's responsive to the public safety pay plan employees in particular, who, in my experience, have talked a lot about the fact that they have no retirement health insurance. So, and if I had to say, characterize what I've heard, the firefighters in particular expressed more of a concern about that, frankly, than they did about pay, although I think they're also sensitive to the parity issue. But their biggest one was the fact that they end up with no insurance. So I like number 5. The only thing I would point out is that I would hope that this would be done in conjunction with a service, which is where we sit with employees and we work out a timeline for accumulation of funds in that HSA that enables them to buy insurance on retirement, so that we think through with them the whole lifetime plan, and we tell them this is what we're going to do and this is what you would need to do, and then you have a plan for health insurance. Now, the second thing, which I haven't been able to explore with the staff yet, would be whether or not we can use actuarial calculations to compute a premium that would permit them to participate in the retirement health plans we already have, but on a full freight basis, right? So the idea would be that they had saved up enough money by then through this program to just buy that insurance and at least have access to group insurance, which otherwise they don't. So I think there's more to it than just this, but I think that would go a long way towards addressing issues that are not covered in the pay proposals that have been raised by the public safety workers.
Do you want to take any action, or do you think it could be addressed in the next year's compensation?
Well,
Comprehensive
obviously,
comp and pay.
that's a, but are we, at this meeting, are we voting on the 969 that's in this?
If you make that motion, we would vote on it.
Right, so I would like to move that we come up with HSA contributions as described in here as a step toward the goal I just described.
Okay. That's a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? I'm
Wait.
sorry,
Wait.
discussion. I'm sorry.
Let me make sure.
Right.
Well, we were going to come back and talk about pay and, I mean, how to fund these things too. So it's just on the list. I've got $553,000 for public safety, $250,000 for the arts, $50,000 for my brother's keeper, $246,000 for the additional staff, and I think that's it.
And this would be 687 in the general fund, and then the enterprise funds have got separate amounts, so I guess all of that would have to be cleared.
Okay. Mr. Jones, were you going to comment on number 5?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor. So, Councilmember Driggs, one of the things that we pointed out here on the, I guess, the last sentence is that doing this by itself, we'd prefer to have it a more comprehensive look at it. So this was a question that you asked, we tried to respond to it. And if there was a way that this just becomes a part of the benefits package conversation around health care that begins a new plan year in January, we'd like to have that flexibility, because the way this would occur, this would be $600,000 that would be added to the list, and we're already over $1 million.
I'm okay with that. I hope it just doesn't disappear in the Never Never Land, so I would withdraw the motion and urge the manager to focus on this issue, because it's one of the key topics that I hear about, particularly from the public safety people.
I agree with you. I think it's one of those things that will help us all the way around in terms of this. But I do see it as we can't continue to add without looking at what we currently have, and I think that assessment is so important. So we don't have a motion now, and you've heard the commitment, Mr. Jones. The next item that we have, if we don't have any further motion, is on the item number 6, and it was the tiering the healthcare sliding scale. And again, another compensation item. Ms. Ajmira?
So, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Mr. Manager did a good job of doing some background research on this. So the cost for doing a sliding scale a premium that's based on the wage. It's, comes out to be around $280,000. I think we often talk about providing affordable health care premiums for our employees so they can take care of themselves and their families. We heard at the public forum where we had employees from water, from solid waste, who spent over 10% of their salary in just paying healthcare premium. And I think we can do better. So our current plan, I think this is a bold step forward where we can ensure that we can provide affordable healthcare to all employees. And I hope that my colleagues will support me. I think this is very important. And this will help everyone who makes less than $55,000 a year. So you're talking about Charlotte Water, you're talking about solid waste, you're talking about firefighters, police officers. I think this is very important. A lot of private employers have this program in place. I know when I worked for private sector, we have had this. I think we got to take an important step forward to provide affordable health care for those who make less than $55,000.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to move forward,
Second.
to move this forward,
For,
to approve this healthcare sliding scale for premiums based on wages.
so let's just make sure we're talking about up to $54,200.
Yes, so the estimated cost is $280,000.
For all funds, okay? We have a motion and a second, Mr. Driggs.
Just as a clarification, Mr. Manager, would this be applied to the city contribution, or would it affect, in other words, how in practice does it work? Because the premium is the sum of the city's share and the employee's share. Now,
Right, so I'm going to cut to the chase. Ryan, can you pop up and just explain this pretty quickly?
Ryan Bergman, I'm a special assistant to the city manager. So the way that this would work is it's almost like a relief program where the total premium cost stays the same. But for these people, the city would pick up a bigger portion of it. So the total premium stays the same, the employee premium is reduced. The important thing to remember about this is we're using our basic PPO plan to determine if they're eligible or not. Because that's what the plan that we use for Affordable Care Act. And the idea is if we can't give you a basic PPO plan at 9.5% or less, then we're going to pay the difference so that you can get it at 9.5%. So what you end up happening is you have about 350 employees who get some kind of relief from this. And some people only get $1 or $2 a week, and then other people get, I believe the most was $48 would be the absolute most. And the way this is done is it really focuses on not only the lower income people, but the lower income people with family coverage by design.
Yes. And,
I'm sorry,
I just wanted to add
well,
something.
let's go
Mayor, I
ahead
had
and
a
I'll come
follow-up
back
to my
around.
question.
We have a
I wanted
question.
to follow up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Driggs, a follow-up to your question, yes,
Right.
and then Mayor Pro Tem.
So the premiums paid by employees that didn't qualify for this would not be affected?
Exactly,
The
and that-
out-of-pockets, right?
Exactly,
What we're talking
that's
about
why we
is taking the
structured it that way.
out-of-pocket that did apply to the low income, and you're using the 9.5% criterion to define it. So there's no kind of general means test idea. If an employee happens to be married to a millionaire, they still get the break?
Yes, and that's one of the
Perhaps
issues with this.
Because the Affordable Care Act is not just one person's salary, right? It's the financial circumstances of the family. But you're saying here that if you're in one of those lower-paying jobs, regardless of your family or domestic financial circumstances, you get this relief.
Yeah, one of the issues administratively is all we can do is look at that employee's salary. We use 9.5% because it's really the only healthcare number that's out there federally. And truth be told, the 9.5%, which it does say, is what they use as a benchmark for employee-only coverage. So this is taking it one step further, and we're using that 9.5% for all coverages. But yes, you are correct that you're not able to tell the household income under this program, just like you can't necessarily tell the true needs of a family by their income in general.
But we don't know how many of our employees are from dual income households and how many are from, because really this is appropriate for a single income person, right? They're the ones who are affected this way. And in the context of two incomes in the household, even the Affordable Care Act would say that is the number that decides whether or not you're entitled to relief. So I just don't want us to be subsidizing people who really don't need the help, frankly. And that's why I suggest there might be a different criterion.
I wanted, Mayor Pro Tem's next, and then Mr. Winston.
So, thank you, Mayor. Are only full-time workers able to get health care with the city of Charlotte, with the exception of us?
We're full-time workers.
No,
No. You get insurance if you're part-time.
okay.
More than 30 hours a week on average, we provide health care, an option to procedural care, and that's in compliance with the Affordable Care Act.
Okay.
So, yes, part-time people get health care.
Well, we get healthcare.
All right, Mr., did you have anything else?
Yeah, no, that's it. I just want to clarify also, Ms. Ajmera mentioned that what the private sector does, but there's a huge difference between the top salaries and the lowest salaries in most private sector large corporations. So I would want to make sure that what we're not saying is that the top salaries in government would be subsidizing those lower salaries. It's just purely coming out of the general fund.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Because that's how it works in the private sector, is it's coming out of those top salaries, they're paying more.
I think the question is, does it come out of the self-insurance fund, which is a subsidized fund, or does it come, is this adding an 100 and 280 to the self-insurance fund?
This would have to come from outside the self-insurance fund for the reason that she mentions.
So you'd have to increase, but it would be
Right.
contributed to the
And this
health.
is an annual cost,
Okay.
and a program like this would probably be better brought in at the beginning of a plan year. So it would be actually be half of that.
That would make sense. Mr. Jones?
So Mayor, members of council, so Ryan hit it on the head, much like Mr. Driggs' previous proposal, which would have been number 5. This would be good to do at the beginning of a plan year. What I want to do is, up to the staff, this is 2 weeks, right? So 2 weeks, we came back with something that we think makes sense, and we've made it overly generous. So we had the same questions that you had about, I used Mary to a rocket scientist, right? So maybe that's you. But we wanted to err on the side of making it as inclusive as possible. So Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, the 54,000 isn't really the limit. It is this, you look at all the employees, and we don't want any employee paying more than 9.5% for health insurance.
Yeah, 54,000 isn't a limit on the program. If you took our current enrollment population, our current salaries, 54,000 is the maximum somebody makes who would be eligible currently, and that benefit would only be $1 a week. So it is focused more on the 30s and the 40s. And like I said, it's almost exclusively family coverage with some employee and spouse in there as well.
So Mayor, if you,
Yes, sir.
so much like item 5, if item 6 could be a part of how we address health care moving forward, that would help us to not have a mid-year adjustment.
So consistent, to make it consistent with what you're doing
Yes.
upcoming. I don't believe that was the motion. When was your motion to start, Ms. Ajmera?
My motion was to start as soon as possible. I think there are people that are hurting. I think we heard very loud and clear from those folks who were there at the public forum, where they could not afford to pay for the healthcare premium. I don't think it's fair for us to say, oh, well, we're going to study this, we're going to come back. I think the time is now for us to address this. I cannot wait for, okay, I cannot say my doctor, I'm going to come back next year, because guess what? I will have a better healthcare insurance premium to support this. I think we need to do this now.
I understand we need to do it now. I understand the passion about it, but the question was, you have to do it, or the suggestion is to not mess it up by not having a plan increase. So it would be actually January of 2019. Is that your motion?
Yes, so
Thank you.
pretty
That's
much
what
when this budget goes in effect would be January.
That's not the same as, help me with what you, the manager would like to do it if it's receives the votes with the plan change. That would mean it would be included in the budget it would start in January with the plan.
July 1 is the new budget year.
So January,
Okay.
whatever is sooner. So,
That would be July.
my question to manager, how soon can
Okay.
you do this?
The plan
January.
change time, okay.
Okay, so if manager
January.
can do it
All
sooner.
right, it would be funded and the plan change, okay. Mr. Phipps.
Would that
Mr.
correspond?
Winston was next. I apologize, Mr. Winston.
No, real quick, I just, I'm in favor of this change. Whenever we can, as soon as we can put it in, or as soon as it makes sense to put it in, I would just say, I think everybody should be able to afford health insurance. I think if you're a rocket scientist or not, you should go by this means. But, I mean, while we might have somebody married to a rocket scientist at the table, that is quite the anomaly. And especially, I would say that's an anomaly in 8,000 and even more an anomaly in a subset of 350 employees. Again, knowing that the environment that we're in, that I'm assuming that these are workforce level employees at least. And we know that we have a problem with affordability in this city overall, to exist in the city with folks that exist within the workforce subsection. So I think that conversation it might be relevant academically, definitely not functionally to what we're trying to do as an employer of choice and not last resort in this city.
I have Mr. Phipps.
Right, I was wondering, would the effective date of it be consistent with, I mean, does this have to go through any kind of open enrollment period or anything like that?
Yes.
Yeah, so the open enrollment would be in the fall.
Okay.
And one other important note is that we would be calculating the relief based on if they took our basic PPO plan.
Right.
So if somebody, who makes more but chooses to take a more expensive plan, that would be their own choice. The idea behind this is we're giving them our basic option at that amount.
Is there any other important fact that you would like for us to know? Okay, all right. Mr. Driggs.
Just like to remind everybody, this year, already in the manager's budget, we have held premiums flat, and there's an August holiday. So I think that we've done very well by employees this year, and therefore, but we're not going to be able to do that next year. And so if this became effective in the next insurance year, then that's when the relief is, they're already getting relief right now. So my question to the manager is, if we decided to go with the notion of making this effective in the next policy year, do you need something in the budget now in order to be able to deliver something like this, if that's where we come out?
I believe in the general fund, I need half of the I need 85,000.
So I'll make a motion to that.
You need 85,000 in the budget?
It says annually,
For the
what you'll need is
part-year
170 built in
effectiveness.
for the next year.
So this is,
Right.
yeah, so the 170 is the annual number. If we started with the plan year, and I don't even know if it's half of that 170.
So
It's 85.
I have a question. Just further clarification. So if you were to start in January,
Yes,
that's when you need 85, and
Yes.
then 170 moving forward.
yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes,
sorry,
Mr.
one more
Driggs?
point. I still think we ought to have some sort of more effective means test on this. I mean, the idea that we could be giving money to households with a lot of income, and it wouldn't take much. I mean, a tax return or something that kind of establishes that need that we're talking about on the low-paid employees really exists. And I'm sure it does. I'm sure there are a lot of people that we want to have this. But at some point, as with the Affordable Care Act, your eligibility should not be tied just to one component of household income.
We could have some type of
A
certification
means test, right?
that we do, that people sign.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so with that, a means test, and all in favor of adding the healthcare sliding scale for people making 50,
Is the means test included in that motion?
It's based on the wages.
no, the manager was saying that he could, that's the question. Do you want to include the means test in your motion?
I'm sorry. Did I miss something? You said means, I guess, are we including means test?
No, did you hear Mr. Driggs?
Yeah, I heard
comment?
Mr. Driggs, but I'm asking Mr. Jones as to what he needs in order to implement this program.
No, he doesn't need
You
a
don't
means
need
test. This
means
is something
test.
that
So
Need
I-
a means
yes,
test,
so
he
then-
said that he could have one.
No, I think as I put forward my motion, I'm
Okay,
going
so
to
the
keep as
motion
is.
is to implement not with the means test for the 9.5% standard, with the 9.5% standard. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any,
Wait,
I'd like
wait,
to
wait.
offer a substitute.
Yeah, I
motion.
a substitute, we have a substitute motion, sorry.
Again, I
Mr.
repeat
Driggs.
to everybody, we don't want to be in a situation where we're paying this to households that have generous incomes. And the Affordable Care Act is designed the same way, and that's how this should work. This is modeled on the Affordable Care Act in terms of the kind of levels of support we're targeting, but it says you have to show that you have a real hardship. And somebody who makes $40,000 a year and is married to someone else who makes $100,000 a year is not really the kind of person we hope to help with this.
Is
So-
the means test a standard generally in this practice? I don't know anything about how this is done, but is it an important fact? Is that the way it's done?
It's not.
It's like getting
Well-
insurance. You can't, if you get insurance somewhere else, you gotta say that.
I don't know I didn't know whether that was a yes or a no, Ms. Isel.
I would second Mr. Driggs' motion.
Okay, well, there's a substitute motion.
So
The manager would like
I
to say
believe
something.
Mr. Driggs' point is, do you take the single income or the family income? Is
Right.
that where you're
Yes.
headed with this?
Right,
And so that's the question.
that is the question.
Okay.
Miss, all right,
What's the answer?
Ms. Mayfield?
We don't have.
I'm trying to get a standard. Is there a standard process that's required? We don't know the benchmark. If it's the practice, anyway. And I don't hear an answer. I'm asking, is it a practice in the implementation of this kind of policy to consider the household income with some kind of test? I just don't know
Okay.
that. We don't know, we don't have an answer.
So
So,
my question for the
Ms.
manager.
Mayfield is next.
Mr. Manager, what we know realistically, we can't change the insurance plan in the middle of it. But as you're looking to go forward, I also want to make sure that we're being, because we keep blending the line of the market and where we are. There are some things that we do that are market compatible and some things that aren't because we're government. We're not the market. And we're not in a position to go toe-to-toe with the market on a lot of things because our funding model isn't the same as the market. But it would, I believe, and you and I had this conversation starting last year, that I agree with my colleague, Mr. Driggs, and Mayor Pro Tem, that we need to look at those who would benefit the most from a much lower premium. But I also want to make sure that we're not penalizing our employees. So there's what that litmus test is legally, is where I'm believing and what I'm hoping that I'm hearing from you, Mayor, as we're asking for time for the manager to come back with a recommendation, that's the type of information that you're going to identify for us, because we don't want to penalize you if you're single, but if you're adding on family members, because we don't know people's situations. Someone married, their spouse very well could have that $100,000, that six-figure job, and they lose that job because there's a lot of transition happening. So do we want to penalize you for what you once had? I hope that
No,
what you're hearing.
You get to change if your status
Right,
changes,
if
you
your
get to come
status
in.
changes, you get to change. But
automatically.
the other side of that is, while we're having this conversation right now, opening the door, of which that's where our health comes in, the clinic, and just presenting everything to say what we're doing so that we just have as much transparency as possible, because our health is helping a lot of employees. So by the time you get this information back to us, you'll have better numbers to see how it's benefiting and see what can be done to expand it. Because that's no fees when you walk in. We need to be highlighting those things.
So, let's have a motion for, the substitute motion is to base it on combined income. All in favor, raise your hands, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all in favor, okay. So we're gonna have a means test. All right, so I'm gonna, it is now 4:45. We have a 5 o'clock meeting, we have a public forum, and we have zoning hearings, and we have an agenda to do. So I'm gonna just check in with you and see, I have the public safety pay plan approximately 553. I'm gonna round all of these
Sure,
up.
sure.
553,000. Arts and science, 250,000. Staffing for service increases and code and in the sustainability area, 166,000. Healthcare for the plan that we just discussed, 85,000. And I'm going to ask, my brother's keeper, if I remember, we got if I got a letter or if we got an increase in our block grant, I wonder if we can absorb that through the 10%, Mr. Manager, and so we would focus on the 500, 700, about $1 million for increases that we have, and I just want to make sure that the options were, that if we could just go around the room and ask people, do you have a program that you would ask the manager to come back on June the 4th? Otherwise, his recommendation is that he would do across-the-board cuts in the operations of everything except police and fire. So right now, I think the question is, do you have something that you would like to put on the table to reduce? So I'm going to assume my brother's keeper can be done through the block grant 10%. We got an increase in that, we just found out. Pam?
CDBG
Ms.
funds.
White?
We doing that?
She's trying to get you your money.
Pay for it.
Can we pull, was the increase in there, and could we do the 10% out of that? Okay, just come back to us, we'll be back in June. So, do we have anything else that we think, did I miss anything that received the 6 votes? Mr. Driggs?
Oh, that received the
Mayor, I
six.
don't know,
Okay.
the one-time adjustments haven't even come up yet.
Right.
No, we're doing the capital, this is the operating, the one-time adjustments
And
for
I'm just
capital.
wondering when we're going to do the capital.
I don't know when we're going to do it, we can do it after the zoning hearings.
2 hours on $100,000 items, and this is $11 million bucks. It's just the wrong order.
I'm not disagreeing with that. When would you like to, what would the council like to do it? I'm saying we're going to have to bring the budget back on June the 4th. We need some sense of where we are on the one time, but we are going to have a June 4th meeting.
We do it.
That's up to you, whatever you guys want to do, we can keep on plowing through,
Let's keep
but we
plowing.
have to have a 5 o'clock stop.
Okay.
And
that's 10 minutes from now,
That's
right?
10 minutes, so go back to the summary page the one time. Maybe if people really know where they are, we'll just take a test vote to see where people are on the one-time adjustments. All right? So, Mr. Bakari.
We'll take the vote now. What I'd say is I have followed through on my promise from the last meeting. I've been engaging the private sector. I am hopeful that I will come back by the time we vote on the budget to bring us more formal letters of intent for that $5 million match. And if I'm not able to do so, the strings that we learned from the city attorney that we'd attach to it would make these funds undeployable unless the private sector match was there. I believe this extra $5 million will have a great ROI. The heavy lift is all on me and the private sector to bring those funds back. So I would hope that we could support that, knowing that if I don't follow through, the money doesn't go anywhere.
How would you fund the $5 million?
I'd go and make further cuts to the other capital budget, including the Joint Communications Center.
Further cuts?
Wow.
Okay,
Cut enough.
I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
So you would make cuts in,
If you would like me to go back and then pull my old list of things I think could be cut, I believe JCC is one of them. I'm glad to do so. I would hope that if we all would give me the opportunity, again, not knowing these would be deployed without having the match, that the manager would be able to go and make a recommendation of what could be prioritized above
we're
and
not going
beyond
to
that.
resolve this in 10 minutes, and I don't want to do that. It's ineffective,
Okay.
and it doesn't communicate very well. I do think it's appropriate if you've got questions about how to do this, I think that the manager, at this point, with the $1 million that we have to the general fund, and then the $11 million, we are going to have to figure out some way. The manager's got a suggestion. Let's just test the operating premise that if you have a reduction that you think in the operating fund for these ongoing budget adjustments, that you'll send them in to the managers or Phil's before our next meeting, which is June 4th.
Well, and I was just unclear. I wasn't expecting to come here with a very specific $5 million
No,
offset.
let me come to that.
Okay.
All right, and then if otherwise, the option will be for the manager to reduce across the board the operating accounts to fund that approximately $1 million. Mr. Winston?
I would like to not make the police operating budget exempt. I mean, we're talking about spending millions of dollars and giving folks cars to take home, right?
So if you'd like to take home cars on the list, that would be something that I was saying, send that in. Or you want to go around and we know Mr. Winston wants to put take-home cars on the list.
I support that one.
Okay, so I'm going to is that okay? Does everybody understand where we stand for June the 4th on the operating ongoing?
We're supposed to come with things.
You have to send them in advance because they need to be vetted.
Yeah.
I'm looking at I'm trying to get a calendar up here.
So based on the initial feel of the capital thing, I'm assuming we're not going to have that discussion
I don't think we're
now?
going to be
Yeah,
able to
okay.
do the capital discussion in the appropriate amount of time that it deserves. So if we look at, can you get those things in by Friday morning? If you have anything for the ongoing budget
We have
adjustments?
the staff to help us do that.
Well, you don't, so do what you can. That's all we can ask. All right, so the next thing is, on the one-time adjustments, it seems to me with the magnitude of money for the $5 million, that you either have to find a way to cut something out or look at it as the second bond cycle, which would be in 2020.
So so the same Friday deadline, we work to then bring the same kinds of offsets or postponements to the manager, and that Keith then can bring back to us in the Monday meeting
Right.
with his recommendation, then we'll do the vote then?
Does that make sense, Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Phipps?
And would this proposed list go to all council members just in case whatever is being proposed to be cut would
yeah.
affect certain?
It seems like
Well, do you want to do it on Thursday so it can come out on Friday? And we can take it by email.
sure.
Would Thursday be better? That would be better to get the information to everyone by Friday.
So, Mayor. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out where we are. So if the universe with the operating budget right now is what has occurred, then we got three different numbers over here. So let's just say it's about $1.1 million.
About $1.1 million, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
what I got.
So if it's $1.1 million and it's $1.1 million to try to address, and it's not a new running tab starting on the 4th, I would like to have a chance to try to address the $1.1 million.
Yes, and we're giving you that chance any way
Okay.
that you want.
Okay.
But I also want people to have the chance to send to you things
Sure.
that I've heard Mr.
Okay,
Winston say,
okay.
he doesn't want to
Okay.
do this unless we consider police budget or specifically the cars, so the take-home cars.
So they'll send deletions.
They send that list to you, and I think we
Okay.
have to have it by
So,
Thursday.
but with that, I have a this is very difficult. It is very difficult because you're asking us stuff, and friends, I was the one who requested the entire operating budget of the police department. And even within this, as I'm going through this, I'm looking at, for instance, miscellaneous contractual services, $5 million. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. On top of that, $4 million for specialty departmental supplies. I don't know what that means. So for me to get an accurate cut of all of these things, I need to know all of these lines. And this is just the police department's budget. I don't know these other pieces of the budget where I would suggest that we cut. That is a lot. to do by tomorrow?
The manager
So-
I'll get delirious here.
Mr. Manager.
So, Mayor, the way I understood your direction to me was to try to figure this out, but there may be some suggestions
That's all I
that
was
council
saying.
members may send, like,
That's
we
our
don't
job.
like
It's not
cars,
our job.
police take-home cars, or we don't want $100,000 for Tree Charlotte, things like that. But we would do the heavy lift with
Yeah,
coming
it's-
with some type of balancing act.
Absolutely.
That's, if you have something that you really feel like you want not to include in the budget, you're not being asked to balance the budget. I'm sorry if it implied that you had to do a one-for-one. The manager has a plan, he's going to have that, and if you've got something that you really don't want to see in the budget, then that's something that you can send in. So I think what we really need to do one more time, though, is look at that list of approximately 1.1 and agree that those are the adjustments for the operating budget. And we need a majority because that's what the manager would begin to prepare the operating budget on. That is really important because of the contracts and requirements that are necessary to do that in a timely way. He would come back to us on Monday, June 4th, with his way of doing it, but we need to make sure that we've circled around and we've addressed those things that are on the list today. So I'd like to have a council motion to have the manager prepare a balanced operating budget with the following changes. The public safety pay plan at approximately $553,000. The contribution to the Arts and Science Council for $250,000. I may not have added this correctly. The two staffing changes, it was 166 and 80, so that's like 250 or 246. And then the My Brother's Keeper to look at the community development block grant or add it to the 50,000 in the general fund. And those are the changes that we've made today. So can I have a motion? Oh, that's the
healthcare.
78,000 for the healthcare, sorry, I turned the page. 78,000 for the healthcare. All right. Does anybody, did we miss anything?
85,000.
85,000, sorry. I'm getting tired. So I'd like to have a motion.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any objections? Okay, so we've got the operating budget prepared for changes. And now, on Monday, we'll talk about the one-time adjustments, first thing on the agenda. Mr. Manager, if you have recommendations on how they can be done, please prepare those as well. And if we can get it out by Friday, that
We
would be
will.
very helpful.
We will.
All right, we have,
Council meeting.
all right, we now have a council meeting, and the way that this,
Everyone, the mayor's
everybody,
not
let's,
finished.
the way this is going to work is that we're going to first go in
Yeah.
and handle our consent and business agenda. We will then do the public forum. Then we'll go into the public hearings on the rezoning. Mr. Bakari, you have the invocation or acknowledgement tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
So what time do we have to go to be downstairs?
Right now, we should be down.